Welcome to my channel. This video is the introduction to the series, explaining the title you just saw. In other words, I want to introduce a brand new perspective, that of traditional Chinese metaphysics, specifically the four pillars of destiny, which is also called Ba Zi, to explore some social phenomena we often take for granted. From there, I will interpret common social structures, discuss underlying logic behind them, and even, if possible, propose some solutions at a macro level. For this series, I have prepared scripts that will be published on GitHub simultaneously. Before we dive in, I want to clarify a terminology issue. In many English translations, the co-relationships in the five phases is often translated as control. Personally, I don't fully agree with that translation. In the traditional framework, 克 does not imply absolute or unilateral control, but rather a conditional and dynamic form of restriction. Under certain circumstances, these relationships can shift, weaken, or even reverse. That's why, throughout this analysis, I use the term restriction instead of control. Furthermore, regarding the generation restriction relationships, I'll be using the abbreviation GRR from now on in all future manuscripts and videos for the sake of convenience. The concept of GRR is a universal framework that applies across multiple dimensions, including GRR among the five phases, GRR within 10 God system, and GRR between social forces. The specific implications of this will be elaborated upon in detail later. So, what are these common social problems? I have listed a few relatively common phenomena below. First, government-business relations. We often talk about collusion between government and business. Why does this phenomenon seem to persist across different countries and eras, and why is it so incredibly difficult to root out? Does this imply an inevitable structural link between power and capital? Second, autocracy and innovation. Why is it that in many countries or systems where power is highly concentrated, after long-term rule, their technological innovation capabilities seem to decline? Is there a structural conflict between power concentration and innovative development? Third, religion and economy. Why do we observe that societies where traditional values or religious beliefs are too strong often appear relatively lagging in modern economic development? Is there necessarily a tension between tradition and modernization? Regarding these questions, everyone has their own views. Here, I attempt to provide a brand new analytic framework, which is the four pillars, 八字. I know, as soon as everyone hears 八字, the first reaction is probably fortune-telling. But it is not just personal destiny. In my view, it is more of a set of dynamic models simulating the interaction between the individual and the social environment. Especially one of its core theories, which is GRR within the 10 God system, I believe this theory is not just a summary based on natural phenomena, but more based on social phenomena. Broadly speaking, how does astrology explore a person's fate? Fundamentally, it calculates individual destiny based on the positions and changes of planets. Similarly, the four pillars is essentially a tool to record time. By simulating a person's position in the social structure, it sees if this person can obtain power, money, reputation, and so on. So, how do we apply the theory of GRR within 10 God system to social phenomena? Let's look at the next page. In personal destiny, the official star represents authority, responsibility, and norms. It represents the forces that control and constrain you, such as your boss in the workplace or rules and regulations within company. The wealth star is the resources you control. For example, how much money is in your bank account? This money is the wealth star. The output star represents creativity and expressiveness. For example, whether a person is good at performance or creation is determined by the output star. The companion star represents people of the same class, meaning friends and competitors. The seal star represents shelter, symbolizing help and education received in life. For example, resources and protection given by elders are the seal star. Similarly, certificates and honorary titles are also seal stars. For instance, having a PhD in Germany makes it easier to be respected and treated well in certain aspects, so the certificate acts as a form of shelter. Now, let's project this concept onto social level. So, what is the officer star? It represents the government and power. What is the wealth star? It represents capital, resources, and corporate groups. What is the output star? It represents innovation, technology, and freedom of thought. What is the companion star? It represents the masses, groups. What is the seal star? It represents tradition, culture, and religion. So, when we talk about wealth generates officer, it means on the social level, capital has a natural motivation to nourish and support power. This is one of the underlying logics of the government and business relations mentioned at the beginning. Note that this is just one of them, not the entire logic. We will discuss the specifics later. Based on this core concept, we can build the analytical framework for this series of videos. I plan to unfold this series as follows. First, Part 1, Basic Concepts. Learning is a process of connecting the dots. I will try to use relatively plain language to clearly sort of the basic knowledge of this framework, which means yin, yang, and five physics, the 10 gods, and the GRR. Second, Part 2, Mapping Social Phenomena. Mapping GRR within the 10 god system to corresponding social forces, and then combine the theory with historical cases. That is, explain the principles within certain social phenomena based on the dual perspectives of theory and reality. For example, wealth star restricts seal star. Why does capital impact traditional morality? Or output star restricts officer star. Why do innovative forces naturally challenge authority? Or how the concept of reversal of generation into restriction applies to the game between power and capital. Meaning, when capital is too powerful, how does it turn around to control power? Part 3 is the core part of this video series, and in my view, the most valuable part, social models. By constructing 5 types of extreme social models, simplifying and taking the models to the extreme, they are the officer-based model, the wealth-based model, the seal-based model, the companion-based model, and the output-based model. We will discuss the characteristics of these social structures, the potential problems, and where they lead. What does this mean? Imagine a society where power is the single dominant force. We call it an officer-based society or a centralized social structure. Under these circumstances, what is the power operation mechanism of this society? What are the survival strategies of various classes? How does the social class mobility mechanism function? What are the social contradictions and the dilemmas? Even what is the collapse path of this society? After exploring these extreme social models, we will take it a step further by analyzing specific real-world cases. To achieve this, I have decided to introduce a quantitative framework, the construction of the 10 gods social radar model. By establishing clear quantitative criteria and using an AI-assisted scoring system, we aim to remain as objective as possible. To test the validity of this model, we will use historical calibration and validation, applying the model to fallen empires and the dynasties of the past. Finally, we will move on to the empirical analysis of representative contemporary nations. It's important to emphasize that the vast majority of real-world countries are not defined by a single element, but by a combination of at least two. For instance, the United States is a typical pattern where output generates wealth, and India belongs to the pattern where seal generates companion. Finally, part 4 is the discussion on solutions and the future. Based on the theory of GRR between social forces, how can we mitigate social problems and class contradictions? For example, for an officer-based country, is the antidote really introducing capital? For a country like South Korea, which is almost wealth-based, how can its current dilemma be resolved? We will attempt to find paths toward balance and harmony using the principles of GRR within Tangled system. Of course, these are conceptual insights. In reality, they may not be easily implementable, as vested interest groups are generally reluctant to embrace change. That concludes the overall framework of this series. If you're interested in this topic of this unique perspective, please subscribe to my channel. In the next video, we will officially begin with the basic concepts. Thank you, everyone.